So guys, in this next news story, details of a major police operation that spanned Nottingham, Manchester, Dubai and Spain can now be revealed after nearly 7 years. It centered on Craig Moran, a major figure in organized crime during the time Nottingham was labeled the gun capital of the UK, aka Shottingham, in the early 2000s by the newspapers. Following his release from prison, an upsurge in firearms crime in the city from 2017 was linked to drugs coming in from Manchester via Moran, but a gangland dispute forced him to flee to Marbella in Spain, where he was then attacked by rivals. After moving again, this time to Dubai, Moran was arrested and extradited in 2020 and has been convicted as part of the operation that saw a number of trials, the proceedings of which have ended this month. Moran, who is now 42, started as part of the gang based in Nottingham's Bestwood estate, which was unofficially run by Colin Gunn, a notorious criminal whose influence left the city with a terrible reputation. As I said, it was called Shottingham. Gunn's group was behind many of the crimes which, in 2003, led to the papers describing Nottingham as the assassination city and the gun capital of the UK. One of the most shocking was the murder of the jeweller Marianne Bates, who was shot dead in a bungled robbery. Moran was jailed for 13 years for plotting the armed raid at the Time Centre in Arnold in Nottinghamshire. He was released in 2017. Nottinghamshire Police's Operation Enklik began 6 months later after a pump-action sawn-off shotgun was discovered in a raid on a house in Bestwood. This provided key evidence, as the firearm was found to have used in Manchester and it contained the DNA of Callum Sims, the cousin of Moran. A month later, officers recovered 2 handguns inside a car abandoned in Bestwood, close to Sims's home. The police operation escalated between December 2017 and February 2018 when gunshots were fired at 4 different locations in and around Bestwood, with one man shot in the leg inside the Duke of St Albans pub. In April 2018, police executed a warrant at another house in Bestwood, which was the home of Lee Hudson, Moran's nephew. Officers found 58 cannabis plants, cannabis in bags and growing equipment, and there's also £13,000 in cash, a cash counting machine, 2 encrypted mobile phones and 131 rounds of ammunition. Nottinghamshire Police Assistant Chief Constable Rob Griffin said the gun attacks prompted a robust police response. He said, "This was the first time in a long while we had seen firearms criminality on the Bestwood estate. We saw an upsurge in the discharge of firearms at or around the same time." He also said Moran was identified as a significant threat because he was arranging the delivery of guns and significant quantities of drugs into Nottingham. He was a big-time gangster, he said. He said at that time he was the head of the Bestwood organised crime group, and we very quickly started to connect the recovery of firearms in Nottingham to an organised crime group in Manchester. Moran was found to be leading the Nottingham operation, while Jody Danson ran it in Salford. Griffin said Moran claimed to work as a fitness instructor and thought he was above the law. He had no legitimate means of income, but drove an £80,000 Range Rover, and he was actually leasing that for about £1,200 a month, and he had an appetite for designer clothes, expensive hotels, expensive watches. He made payments exclusively in cash, and he lived that gangster lifestyle. Moran already suspected the police were bugging his Range Rover when the breakthrough in Operation Enklik came to in July 2018. The East Midlands Special Operations Unit, the SOU, intercepted a car driven by Sims carrying 6 kilos of heroin and coke into Nottingham from Manchester. Detectives intercepted phone conversation which showed that drug suppliers blamed Moran for the seizure and expected him to reimburse them. Moran then went on the run before several other members of the Bestwood and Salford crime groups were arrested. An international manhunt was launched after Moran fled the UK by crossing from Dover to Calais, hidden in the back of a lorry. ACC Griffin described what happened to him in Marbella. He goes, he was living an extravagant lifestyle, but he was still a target for reprisals, and he was seriously injured in a brutal attack. He was shot in the kneecaps and slashed across his face and mouth. Then there was a European arrest warrant issued for his arrest. After he was attacked in Marbella, he fled to Dubai. Griffin said he was spending lots of cash and he was living that big fancy lifestyle, and he was eventually arrested by a special forces team in Dubai, and then his extradition followed. The extradition warrant named Gunn as a close associate of Moran, and Gunn was actually jailed for life in 2006 for conspiracy to murder a couple, John and Joan Strickland, in a revenge attack over the actions of Mrs. Strickland's son, Michael O'Brien. Documents also show that after his release from prison, Moran had lived in a Nottingham house that was owned by Gunn, leading to speculation from some officers that the jail crime boss was still giving orders from behind bars. But Griffin dismissed claims Gunn still had influence in Nottingham's favour. He said, "In my opinion, I don't think that's what was happening. Craig Moran, I think, stood alone and saw a void in what he saw as a lucrative market. I suspect he saw a vacuum in that area, saw an opportunity in the market, and he seized upon it." After a series of court cases which ended on the 18th of June, it can now be reported. So the defendants that have been convicted of the operation are Craig Moran, 42, admitting conspiracy to transfer prohibited weapon, conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, and conceal, disguise, convert, transfer, remove criminal property. You got Lee Hudson, is 26, from Nottingham. He got found guilty for possessing ammunition without a firearm certificate, conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, producing Class B drugs. You got Callum Sims again, conspiracy to transfer prohibited weapon, conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, possessing a weapon. You got Callum Kirk, you got Darren Beckson, you got Richard Jones, you got Dean Hudson, you got Jody Danson, you got Craig Bailey, and you got John Newens. So it's believed that these guys are going to be sentenced at a later date. So a little bit more into Craig Moran. So back in 2005, he was part of a gang that was jailed for their part in robbery that led to the killing of a jeweler called Marion Bates. So Craig Moran and another man, Dean Betton, were convicted at Stafford Crown Court of plotting to rob Mrs. Bates, who was shot dead whilst trying to protect her daughter. Another man, Peter Williams, who actually attacked Mrs. Bates' husband, Victor, who sadly passed away a few years ago, may he rest in peace, with a crowbar and helped the gunman to escape, and he was convicted of the murder. There was another person who was convicted of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice along with Moran by providing them with a false alibi. So the killer of Marion Bates was yet to be found, and it was said in court that it would have been a guy who goes by the name of James Brody. He was linked to a number of armed robberies. Brody actually disappeared after the shooting, and it's thought that he may have been murdered in a gangland execution. During that trial, the court heard how Mrs. Bates steps in front of her daughter in an instinctive act of bravery when Williams and the gunman burst into the family shop in Nottingham wearing motorcycle helmets. It says, Mr. Bates, the husband, then picked up a fencing sword in a bid to stop the two men from escaping, but Williams beat him to the ground with a crossbar. The prosecutor said that at the time, as the gunman pointed his weapon towards Mr. Bates, Williams had set to work with a crowbar, jamming the padlock with one of the display cabinets. At the same time, the daughter was on the telephone speaking to her husband when the gunman turned his weapon on and told her this is an armed robbery. She said for a moment she did nothing. She was so paralyzed with fear she did nothing. I saw she kept the handset in her hand, and perhaps because she did not react quickly enough, the gunman started moving towards her. Marion Bates then moved towards the back of the shop and in front of her daughter, and at this stage she moved forward, her arms outstretched, and she was shouting no. She was clearly determined to put herself between the gunman and the daughter, an instinctive act of bravery by a mother trying to protect her daughter. And it cost her life. I just want to say rest in peace, Marianne. My condolences go out to your family. So guys, it's a bit of history on Craig Moran, but as I said, they're going to be sentenced at a later date. It's your boy GT. Keep it locked, keep it real.